Golden Child's Revenge. I evicted my mom after she disowned me. Hey Reddit. Buckle up because you won't believe the twisted family drama I've been dealing with my entire life. From blatant favoritism to a shocking inheritance and a sister's disastrous wedding. It all culminated in a decision that changed everything and left my mother essentially homeless. Was I justified? Let me lay it all out for you. Growing up, the line between my mother Karen's children and her favorite was as clear as day. My younger sister, Rachel, now 37, was the undisputed queen of our mother's world. It was like the moment Rachel was born. I, the older sibling, simply ceased to exist. I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but that's honestly how it felt. I understand that my mother was naturally protective of Rachel because she was born underweight and sickly. It must have been terrifying for her, having a vulnerable child. But Rachel wasn't just the family's baby. She received royal treatment that extended well beyond what was reasonable. For example, Mom would hand-feed Rachel until she was well into middle school because she disliked eating alone. School projects, homework, Mom simply completed them for Rachel. No questions asked. Rachel could stay home from school whenever she didn't feel like going. And then there was me. I had food and other essentials, so I wasn't completely disregarded. But emotionally, I was utterly alone. Unless it had to do with Rachel, Mom never truly cared about me. I remember one time when I was around 10. Mom was preoccupied at a spa and completely forgot about my dentist appointment. I waited outside the school for hours until a family friend saw me and offered me a ride home. When my mother finally arrived, she acted as if it wasn't a huge deal. "Oh, I thought you'd figure it out," she said with a dismissive wave. The only person who truly saw me was my father, Michael. May he rest in peace. He wasn't home as much as I would have liked because he worked tirelessly. But when he was, especially when Karen and Rachel weren't around, Dad and I would sneak out for movies or ice cream. He would slip me extra cash for birthdays or school outings, always urging me not to tell my mother. In retrospect, I believe he was trying to compensate for the constant feeling of being unseen. But even Dad couldn't deny the favoritism. Everything was always better for Rachel. I had to save or work for what I wanted. Rachel only needed to ask, and it would magically appear. I requested a bike for Christmas, and Rachel made a last-minute request for the same thing. Christmas morning, Rachel received a brand new, gleaming bike under the tree. I got socks. "You're older," Mom said when I dared to question it. "You can get one for yourself by saving money." But it was more than just material possessions. Rachel's happiness was Karen's obsession. Mom would leap into action to solve even the smallest problem Rachel faced, like a friend not texting her back or getting a bad grade. I quickly learned not to bother going to her for anything. I was always told to stop being so dramatic or to figure it out like an adult whenever I was upset. Of course, Rachel soaked it all in. Why wouldn't she? She was living the dream because Mom took care of everything for her, so she didn't have to do anything. Rachel eventually stopped learning even the most fundamental life skills. She couldn't manage her own schedule, cook, or even clean, because Mom had shielded her from everything. I didn't fully realize how toxic the dynamic was until high school. Mom would complete Rachel's schoolwork after Rachel would sob to her about how difficult her lessons were. After Rachel failed a high school class, Mom pleaded with the principal to change her grades, accusing the teachers of failing to recognize her unique needs. Karen would go to any length to shield Rachel from any kind of responsibility. Meanwhile, I was supposed to be self-sufficient. If I had trouble in school, I had to work it out on my own. If I wanted to participate in extracurricular activities, I had to use the money I earned from babysitting. And Karen would always say, "You're the older sister. You need to set an example." If I ever dared to voice my displeasure, I was met with eye rolling and a lecture about being dramatic. By the time I graduated, I was desperate to get out of high school. Enrolling in a college in a different city was the best decision I ever made. I could finally breathe. I didn't have to compete for Karen's attention or constantly compare myself to Rachel. I could just be me. Rachel, meanwhile, remained at home and didn't leave until she was 26. Even then, Karen continued to be heavily involved in her life, phoning her 5 times a day to ask things like, "What did you eat?" or "How is your hubby doing?" She would even show up unannounced with groceries, even though Rachel and her husband were perfectly capable of handling those tasks themselves. As for me, I was getting on with my life. I landed a job after graduating college and started building my future. Dad stayed in touch, calling me frequently and visiting when he could. Karen, not so much. She'd occasionally comment on my Facebook posts or send me a birthday text, but that was about it. Honestly, I didn't give a damn. Her constant criticism and favoritism no longer burdened me. In hindsight, I believe Karen's fixation on Rachel stemmed from a desire for control. She never allowed Rachel to grow up because she wanted her to always need her. I, on the other hand, was thrown out of the nest and forced to fend for myself. While it was painful at the time, I now consider it a blessing. While Rachel became completely dependent on Karen, I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. The dynamic remained unchanged even after I moved out. Karen was Rachel's facilitator. I was the forgotten child. And Rachel was the golden child. Some things never change, which is humorous. Not funny, haha. But funny in a depressing way. But everything did change 11 years ago when Dad started getting sick. He blamed it on a stubborn cold. But as the weeks stretched into months, he didn't get better. He actually got worse. He was constantly exhausted, breathless, and simply not himself. Nevertheless, he continued to work because he was a selfless, hard-working man who always put others' needs before his own. Karen didn't seem to notice at all. She was too preoccupied with her daily schedule of yoga sessions, spa visits, and whatever else occupied her time. Rachel was back home by that point, after her first marriage ended. She didn't seem particularly concerned about Dad's health either, and she wasn't working. They both seemed unwilling to face the inconvenience of admitting that something was seriously wrong. I was trying to maintain some distance from all the family dysfunction while building my career in another city. But during our frequent phone conversations, I could sense that something wasn't right. He sounded more worn out and weaker. He dismissed my questions about whether he'd seen a doctor, claiming he was fine. But I knew he wasn't. Things reached a breaking point when he finally went to the hospital after a particularly bad coughing fit. He was diagnosed with a severe lung infection. When I found out, I immediately dropped everything and flew home. I was horrified by what I found. Dad was lying in bed alone, looking so weak. Rachel and Karen, they were out getting manicures. When they returned, Karen pretended to be shocked to see me. She even tried to hug me, but I recoiled. When I questioned her about why she wasn't with Dad, she said she had errands to run. They had both just had their nails done and were carrying shopping bags, so it was clear that they had simply left him alone. I spent as much time as I could with Dad while he was in the hospital. Karen would stop by every now and then, but only for a few minutes. Rachel, she claimed it was too hard for her to see him in that state, so she barely showed up at all. I was juggling everything, communicating with doctors, managing his medication, and trying to make him comfortable. I even slept in a chair by his bedside most nights. It was infuriating that Karen wouldn't step up. It wasn't like she was too busy, since she didn't work. But she acted like going to the hospital was a huge inconvenience. "He's in good hands with the nurses," she said one day. A statement that will forever be etched in my memory. Should I just sit there? Or what? Yes. Karen, supporting your husband is exactly what you're meant to do. Dad was released from the hospital after a week. We hired a nurse to help at home because he still needed around-the-clock care. Karen was expected to take charge and assume more responsibility. She would leave for hours to run errands, only to return with shopping bags. Or she would forget to give him his medications on time. One time, she decided to stop at the salon before picking up an oxygen tank for him. I had already arranged for someone else to deliver it by the time she got home. Rachel was no better. She avoided him completely, claiming she couldn't bear to see him so vulnerable. She spent most of her time in her room, watching TV or browsing on her phone. She even went on vacation with her friends during one of Dad's worst spells, leaving me to handle everything on my own. In the end, I quit my job to care for Dad full-time. I couldn't bear to leave him alone with Karen or Rachel. I didn't trust them to do it right. He deserved better. I cooked his meals, helped him with his physical therapy, and made sure he had company so he wouldn't feel lonely. I loved him, and even though it was exhausting, I would do it all over again if I had to. As Dad's health deteriorated, Karen did make an attempt to try harder, but it was too late. She would sit next to him, but she'd be glued to her phone. It seemed like she couldn't fully focus on him. Rachel only showed up after being guilted into it, and even then, she would excuse herself and leave after a short visit. A few months later, Dad passed away. The nurse and a few of his friends who had come to say goodbye were all around him. Rachel and Karen, they weren't there. Rachel was out with friends, and Karen had gone to some sort of wellness retreat. When it became apparent that Dad was running out of time, I tried calling them both, but they didn't answer. The funeral went by in a blur. I was exhausted and heartbroken, but I still had to put up with the beef from Rachel and Karen. Rachel made a huge show of crying for the majority of the funeral as though she hadn't been ignoring all the warning signals for months. It felt so fake. She hadn't given a damn when it counted. A few weeks after the funeral, Dad's attorney called me to discuss his will. I was expecting a small inheritance or a memento, but nothing more. However, I was completely blindsided when I met with the attorney. Dad had bequeathed the house, his investments, and all his assets to me. Rachel and Karen received nothing. I could only imagine the anguish Dad must have been going through in his final months, seeing how little his wife and youngest daughter cared for him. He left everything to me as a sign of appreciation for everything I'd done for him. When Karen and Rachel found out, they were furious. Rachel actually yelled at the attorney, claiming that her father could never subject her to such treatment. Karen called me and demanded that I give them a portion of the inheritance. I declined. For the sake of my sanity, I disconnected from Rachel and Karen. Their sense of entitlement was draining. I eventually met my husband after moving back to the city where I had worked and focusing on starting over. We moved abroad for his work, got married, and had a baby. To be honest, I didn't feel the need to tell Karen or Rachel about it. It was a fresh start. After a few years, I became a mother to my daughter. Then, out of the blue, Karen showed up at my place. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so seeing her at my door was a shock. She looked worn out and less put together than I remembered. She apologized, expressing regret and wanting to be involved in my daughter's life. She even acknowledged feeling bad about the way she had raised me, saying she wanted to make amends because she had been living with remorse ever since Dad's passing. Although I admit that I didn't entirely trust her, I decided to give her a chance. For a while, things were fine. Karen would occasionally send gifts and video call to see how my daughter was doing. For once, it felt almost normal. Then, predictably, the hints began. Subtle comments about how difficult things were for Rachel, or how she was having financial difficulties. I thought it would pass. Around a month ago, Karen called. The fact that she sounded unusually enthusiastic immediately made me uneasy. Karen doesn't call unless she needs something. She started by asking about my husband and daughter. Then, she dropped the bombshell. Rachel was getting married again. As you may recall, Rachel's first marriage ended after barely a year. She never really got her life back on track after moving back in with Karen. Rachel and I hadn't spoken in over 10 years, so this news was completely unexpected. Karen went on and on about how important this wedding was for Rachel, how it was a fresh start for her. I congratulated her, was polite, and assumed that was the end of it. Then, Karen said something like, "You know, Rachel has had a really difficult time organizing this wedding on a budget. After everything she's been through, she deserves a lovely day." I knew where this was going. "I was hoping you could help out with the expenses," she finally blurted out. "Considering everything your father left you, it's the least you can do." I was astounded. First of all, Rachel and I don't even speak. Second, what level of entitlement does it take to demand money from someone who isn't even invited to the wedding? Indeed, Karen made it clear that I wasn't invited. "Oh, we assumed you wouldn't want to travel with a baby. But of course you're welcome to come," Karen said, attempting to backtrack when I pointed this out. "Your sister is getting married, so you don't need an invitation." I bluntly told her no. I wasn't contributing a single penny. She tried to guilt-trip me, claiming that as the older sister, I had an obligation to help Rachel. She also brought up Dad's money, saying that while Rachel was struggling, I was hoarding the family fortune. I told her that Rachel and I weren't close and that she should contact Rachel directly if she needed help. Predictably, Rachel never did. Karen didn't take no for an answer. Over the next few weeks, she kept bringing up the same point in her voicemails and texts. I was disappointing Rachel. I was selfish, and I didn't care about my family. She even stated, "If you don't help, it will ruin Rachel's big day, and everyone will know it's your fault." The problem is that Rachel and Karen were acting as if I owed them money. But when I needed help, where were they? I was the one who put everything on hold to care for Dad while he was sick, while everyone else continued living their lives. I was the one who stayed by his side. And now they wanted me to swoop in and save the day after years of silence. Not a chance. Karen made matters worse by asserting that Rachel had already booked the venue and paid deposits for musicians, caterers, and decorations, since the invitations had already been sent. She claimed that canceling everything would make the family look foolish. If they couldn't afford it, how did they plan all this? I asked her. Her response, "You are what we need." That was the final straw. I told Karen that since I wasn't giving them any money, she could solve the problem on her own. She broke down in tears and threatened to cut me out of her life if I didn't help. "You already treated me like I didn't exist," I responded, laughing. "What difference does it make?" I hung up and blocked her after that. My husband supported my decision, although he cautioned that there would be criticism from extended family. He was right. Some family members contacted me, saying that family is family and that I should be the bigger person and lend a hand. But where was all this concern when Karen and Rachel were treating me like trash? I ignored them and refused to back down. I haven't replied. And honestly, I don't plan to. But Karen left me one last voicemail, saying, "If you can live with ruining your sister's wedding, then I guess you're not the person I thought you were. Too much of my life has been devoted to going above and beyond for people who don't appreciate it. I'm done." I reached my breaking point after the wedding drama. Karen and Rachel had been living rent-free in the house Dad left me for over a decade. Part of me thought that, especially after Dad's passing, it would be easier to avoid the drama of evicting them. But as time went on, I realized they weren't grateful, didn't respect me, and had no intention of ever being respectful. Let's rewind a bit. When Dad's will was read, Karen and Rachel were furious that Dad left everything to me. Karen argued that because she had lived there for so long, it was her house. Rachel threw a tantrum, screaming about how unfair it was. But the truth is, neither of them deserved a dime, especially considering they couldn't even bother to show up most of the time. Dad left me the house because he could see how much I cared for him in his final months. I see you. I appreciate you. That was how he expressed his gratitude. Even after I inherited everything, I allowed them to stay in the house, hoping that they might change. However, Karen never once offered to pay rent and instead rented out one of the rooms to pay for her own expenses, acting as if the house was hers. Rachel, meanwhile, treated me like a villain, telling the rest of the family that I had tricked Dad into excluding her from the will. They were happy to live in a house they didn't pay for, but they weren't willing to patch things up. After Karen's ridiculous request that I pay for Rachel's wedding, and their constant attempts at manipulation, I finally had enough. I contacted my attorney and had an eviction notice prepared. When Karen received it, she went ballistic. "You can't evict me," she screamed when she called me. "I call this place home. I've lived here for 45 years. I calmly informed her that she had 30 days to vacate the premises and that it was legally my property. Naturally, Rachel jumped into the fray. She accused me of being greedy and heartless, calling me every name in the book. All I cared about was using Dad to get the inheritance, she said. It was ludicrous. I'm the terrible person, even though she was the one who barely saw Dad while he was dying. Karen did everything she could to get me to reconsider. She initially pretended to be tough, saying, "I dare you to kick me out." Then, she turned soft, claiming that the house was all she had left and that she was too old to start over. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared, as if it wasn't a place I should have been collecting rent on for years. She even sobbed about how she was struggling to make ends meet. Her attempt to guilt-trip me, asking, "What would your dad think if he saw you throwing your mother out on the street?" was the final straw. "Dad left me the house for a reason," I told her. "Perhaps he would still be alive if you had given him even half the attention you gave to your spa sessions." I know that was harsh, but I was done sugarcoating things. Karen needed to face the consequences of her actions. Rachel didn't take the eviction well, either. She made a big show of telling everyone that Karen was temporarily moving in with her. She declared to all her relatives that she was supporting Karen and didn't need anything from me. She seemed to want a round of applause for doing the bare minimum, and it was all very performative. On the 26th day of the 30-day notice period, Karen and Rachel moved out. I didn't even bother to show up to oversee the move. I engaged a property manager. After the house was vacant, I had it cleaned and refurbished. I made the conscious decision to rent it to the brother of a family friend, knowing that the house would finally be occupied by people who appreciated it. It was a good feeling. Meanwhile, because I wouldn't pay for it, Rachel's elaborate wedding plans fell through. She was forced to move the wedding from a fancy lakeside venue to a municipal hall. Apparently, this embarrassed quite a few people in their social circle, and Rachel's fiancé was not thrilled. It turns out, he didn't even want a large wedding. Shortly after Karen moved in with Rachel, I started hearing rumors of trouble in paradise, because Rachel had assured him she would find a way. Having his mother-in-law as a permanent fixture in the house did not sit well with Rachel's husband. As usual, Karen felt compelled to interfere in their marriage. She would make snide remarks about Rachel's cooking or critique how Rachel's husband managed the house. She was just a pain. For a while, Chris tried to put up with it. But after one particularly heated argument, in which Karen accused him of not being man enough to provide for his family, Chris issued Rachel an ultimatum: either she leaves, or I leave. Rachel pleaded with him to change his mind, but he refused. The worst part is that Karen didn't go quietly. She lost it when Rachel informed her of Chris's ultimatum. She threatened to remove Rachel from her will, a pointless threat, given that Karen had nothing to leave behind, and accused Rachel of abandoning her like everyone else. After a heated argument, Rachel, likely both embarrassed and fed up, told Karen to figure it out on her own. So, where did Karen disappear to? Not surprisingly, she tried to contact me. She asked me if I would consider letting her move back into the house via email since I had blocked her on every other platform. She wrote about how cruel life had been to her and how, as a mother, she had always tried her best. She even tried to frame it as an opportunity for us to mend and rebuild our bond. I didn't even bother to reply. When I failed to respond, Karen attempted to use guilt-tripping to persuade some extended family members to take her in. Most of them flatly refused, likely having witnessed her behavior firsthand. A distant cousin agreed to let Karen stay for a short period, but she was asked to leave after just 3 weeks. Apparently, the cousin had had enough of her constant complaining and demanding behavior. As for Rachel, she's currently dealing with the consequences of her choices. Although Chris stayed with her, their relationship is reportedly on shaky ground. Chris has become emotionally and financially distant as a result of the wedding cost, Karen's turmoil, and Rachel's reluctance to take responsibility for anything. Rachel has been telling everyone that he, not her, is the problem, even though he has even suggested couples counseling. According to what I've heard, Rachel has been complaining to her family about how unfair it is that Dad gave me everything. She claims that none of this would have happened if I had simply divided the inheritance. She conveniently omits the part where she and Karen treated me like dirt for caring about Dad and disregarded him in his final days. With them, it's always someone else's fault. Despite their turmoil, I've been doing okay. Leasing out the house was the best decision I ever made. The renters, a lovely family, truly appreciate and cherish the space. Thanks to the rental income, I now have financial security and can invest in my daughter's future. My husband and I are doing well in our careers, and we've started planning a long overdue family vacation. As for Karen and Rachel, they made their choices, and they are now dealing with the fallout. Rachel is trapped in a marriage that is about to end. I simply don't care about them anymore. I don't wish them any harm. But the most liberating thing of all has been realizing that their drama is no longer my problem. Thank you for reading and for all of your help along the process, Reddit. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Now, Reddit, I'm turning to you. Based on everything you've read, do you think I was right to evict my mother and cut them out of my life completely? Was I justified in protecting myself and my family after years of mistreatment? I'm eager to hear your opinions, so let me know what you think.